The acrid smell of burning rubber and the shriek of twisting metal were the first things to cut through the torrential North Carolina rain. 12-year-old Maya Williams, huddled under the flimsy awning of a bus stop, watched in horror as the sleek, black Mercedes hydroplaned across the slick asphalt of the highway. It spun, a terrifying ballet of chrome and steel, before slamming with sickening force into the thick concrete of the overpass support. For a heartbeat, there was silence. A silence more profound and terrifying than the crash itself, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain on the bus stop's corrugated roof. Then, the world erupted in a cacophony of car horns, distant sirens, and the panicked shouts of other drivers pulling over. But Maya's world had narrowed to a single point: the crumpled wreck of the Mercedes, its front end accordioned, steam and smoke hissing from under its mangled hood. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. Her grandmother's voice, a constant refrain in her life, echoed in her ears. "Mind your own business, child. The world's got enough trouble without you looking for more." But another voice, one she hadn't heard in years, her father's voice, whispered a different lesson. A memory from a life before he was taken from them. "You see someone fall, Maya Bug. You help them up, no matter who they are. That's the only rule that matters." Shaking, Maya pulled the thin, worn fabric of her hoodie tighter around her small frame and darted out from under the awning. The rain, cold and stinging, plastered her hair to her face and soaked through her threadbare sneakers in an instant. Cars were slowing, people were staring, their faces illuminated by the eerie glow of their dashboards. But no one was moving toward the wreck. It was as if an invisible wall of fear and uncertainty held them back. As she got closer, a new, terrifying sound reached her, a faint, desperate cry from within the mangled car. It was the sound of a boy, his voice cracking with pain and fear. That sound shattered the last of Maya's hesitation. She scrambled down the muddy embankment, her sneakers slipping on the wet grass, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The driver's side of the car was a ruin, the door bent into an impossible shape. But the passenger side, though damaged, seemed accessible. Through the spider web of cracks in the window, she could see him, a boy, not much older than her, slumped in the passenger seat. He had a gash on his forehead, blood mingling with the rain that dripped from his dark, curly hair. His eyes, wide with shock, were the color of warm honey. He was wearing a basketball jersey, the iconic red and black of the Chicago Bulls, with the number 23 emblazoned across the chest. "Hey!" Maya yelled, her voice thin against the storm. "Are you okay?" The boy's head lolled toward the sound of her voice. He tried to speak, but only a pained groan escaped his lips. His eyes fluttered, threatening to close. "No, stay with me," Maya pleaded, her small hands fumbling with the car door handle. It was stuck. She pulled with all her might, her muscles screaming in protest, but it wouldn't budge. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at her. The smell of gasoline was getting stronger, a terrifying counterpoint to the rain. She looked around desperately, her eyes landing on a large rock half buried in the mud nearby. Without a second thought, she grabbed it, its rough surface digging into her palms. It was heavy, but adrenaline gave her a strength she didn't know she possessed. With a cry that was part fear, part determination, she swung the rock against the fractured window. The glass exploded inward, showering the car's interior with glittering shards. The boy flinched, but his eyes remained on her, a flicker of hope dawning in their depths. Maya carefully cleared the remaining glass from the frame, her hands getting cut in the process. But she barely felt the sting. She reached inside, her fingers searching for the seatbelt release. It was jammed. "I can't get it!" she cried, frustration and fear welling up inside her. The boy's hand, surprisingly strong, closed around her wrist. In my pocket," he rasped, his voice a thread of sound. "Pocket knife." Maya's fingers, clumsy with cold and panic, fumbled in the pocket of his basketball shorts. She found it a small multi-tool knife. She pulled it out, her hands shaking so badly she could barely open the blade. After a few agonizing seconds, she managed to free the small, sharp knife. She sawed at the thick nylon of the seatbelt, the blade slipping and catching, each second stretching into an eternity. Finally, with a last, Desperate pull. The belt snapped. The boy slumped forward, his weight threatening to pull him out of the car. Maya braced herself, her small frame straining to support him. She managed to get her arms under his, pulling him slowly, carefully, through the shattered window. He was heavier than he looked, a dead weight of muscle and bone. She dragged him away from the car, her feet sinking into the mud, the rain relentless. They were only a few yards away when a new sound ripped through the air, a loud whoosh, followed by a wave of heat that pushed them to the ground. The Mercedes was engulfed in flames, the fire a hungry, orange beast devouring the wreckage. Maya lay on the wet ground, her body trembling, the boy's head in her lap. Sirens were screaming now, getting closer. Headlights cut through the rain-soaked darkness. People were running toward them, their voices a jumble of concern and awe. But Maya only had eyes for the boy. His honey-colored eyes were open, fixed on her face. You saved me," he whispered, his voice filled with a dawning wonder. I think so," Maya breathed, her own shock starting to set in. A man in a paramedic's uniform was suddenly kneeling beside them, his calm, professional voice cutting through the chaos. "It's okay, kids. We've got it from here." As they gently lifted the boy onto a stretcher, his gaze never left Maya's. Another man, this one in a police officer's uniform, draped a blanket around her trembling shoulders. "You're a brave young lady," he said, his voice kind. "What's your name?" "Maya," she whispered, her teeth chattering. "Maya Williams." The paramedic who was checking the boy's vitals looked up. "Do you know who you just saved, Maya?" Maya shook her head, her mind a numb fog. "That's Marcus Jordan," the paramedic said, his voice filled with a mixture of respect and astonishment. "You just saved Michael Jordan's son." The name hit Maya like a physical blow. Michael Jordan, the legend, the man whose posters had adorned her father's side of the closet, a silent testament to dreams of a different life. She looked at the boy on the stretcher, at his Bulls jersey, at the familiar, determined set of his jaw, and for the first time, she saw the resemblance. Then, the world tilted on its axis. A sleek black SUV, the kind that screamed money and power, screeched to a halt just yards away. The driver's door flew open, and a tall, imposing figure emerged, moving with an athlete's grace that defied the years. He was silhouetted against the flashing lights of the emergency vehicles, a giant of a man whose face was known the world over. Michael Jordan ran toward the stretcher, his face a mask of raw, unfiltered terror. "Marcus!" he roared, his voice a sound of pure agony. He knelt beside his son, his large hands hovering over him, afraid to touch, as if his son might break. "I'm okay, Dad," Marcus whispered, his voice gaining a little strength. "I'm okay because of her." Michael Jordan's head snapped up, his legendary, fiercely competitive eyes, now wide with a dawning, desperate gratitude, locking onto Maya's. He took in her drenched, shivering form, her threadbare clothes, the cuts on her hands, the determination that still lingered in her young face. He stood up, a towering figure of a man, and took a step toward her. Maya, who had faced down a burning car without flinching, suddenly felt a wave of fear so intense it threatened to buckle her knees. This was Michael Jordan, a god from the posters in her father's closet. A man who lived in a world so far removed from her own it might as well have been another planet. He stopped in front of her, the rain plastering his expensive clothes to his powerful frame. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, his face, a face known for its fierce, unyielding confidence, crumpled. His eyes, the eyes that had stared down the greatest basketball players in history, filled with tears. And in the middle of the highway, surrounded by the flashing lights and the pouring rain, the greatest basketball player of all time looked at the poor 12-year-old girl who had just saved his son, and he began to cry. It was a sound of such profound, gut-wrenching relief that it echoed louder than the thunder above, a sound that would be etched into Maya's memory for the rest of her life. Maya's life was a tapestry woven with the threads of scarcity and resilience. She lived with her grandmother, Eleanor, in a small clapboard house on the frayed edges of Wilmington, a neighborhood the city seemed to have forgotten. The paint on their house was peeling, the front porch sagged like a tired old man, and the fence had more gaps than pickets. But inside, it was clean, filled with the smell of Eleanor's sweet potato pie and the quiet, stubborn dignity of two people making do with what little they had. Eleanor was a woman carved from granite and grace. She had worked for 40 years as a housekeeper for the wealthy families on the other side of town, her hands raw and chapped from bleach and polish. Arthritis had finally forced her into a reluctant retirement, and now their world was circumscribed by the meager monthly checks from Social Security and the small pension she had managed to accrue. Every dollar was counted, every expense weighed. A trip to the grocery store was a strategic mission. A new pair of shoes for Maya, an event that required weeks of careful planning. Maya's world was small, but she filled it with books. The local library was her sanctuary, a palace of endless possibility. She devoured stories of faraway lands, of brave heroines and grand adventures, of lives so different from her own they felt like fairy tales. She was a straight-A student, her mind a sharp, inquisitive thing that her teachers both admired and were sometimes intimidated by. They saw the spark in her, the fierce intelligence that burned behind her quiet, watchful eyes, and they worried. They worried that the spark would be extinguished by the relentless, grinding poverty that defined her existence. Her father, James, had been the one who had nurtured that spark. He had been a dreamer, a man who saw a world of possibility where others saw only dead ends. He had worked 2 jobs, one at the docks and another as a night janitor, and he had filled their small house with books and music and laughter. He had been the one who had taken Maya to the basketball court, teaching her to dribble and shoot, telling her stories of the great Michael Jordan, a hometown hero who had shown the world that a kid from Wilmington could fly. He had saved every spare dollar in a jar labeled Maya's College Fund, a testament to a future he was determined to build for her. But that future had been stolen from them 3 years ago. A faulty piece of equipment at the docks, a moment of inattention, and James was gone. The laughter in their small house had died with him, replaced by a quiet, aching grief. The college fund had been swallowed up by funeral expenses and the mounting bills that Eleanor could no longer keep at bay. All that was left of him were the books, the worn-out basketball, and the posters of Michael Jordan in the closet. A painful reminder of the dreams that had died with him. The day of the accident had started like any other. Eleanor had a doctor's appointment on the other side of town, a routine checkup for her arthritis that was anything but routine for them. The city bus, their only mode of transportation, had a route that was notoriously unreliable. To ensure she wouldn't miss her appointment, Maya had to walk her grandmother the 2 miles to a more central bus stop, the one on the edge of the highway. It was a walk they made every few months, a small pilgrimage of necessity. That morning, the sky had been a bruised, ominous purple. Eleanor had looked up at the clouds, her joints aching with the promise of rain. "Maybe we should wait, child," she had said, her voice laced with a worry that had become her constant companion since James's death. "We can't, Grandma," Maya had replied, her voice gentle but firm. "You'll miss your appointment, and they'll charge you for it. We can't afford that." So they had set out, Eleanor leaning heavily on her cane, Maya carrying a tattered umbrella that was more wishful thinking than actual protection. They had made it to the bus stop just as the heavens opened up, the rain coming down in a solid, gray sheet. The bus was late, of course. Maya had huddled with her grandmother under the small awning, watching the cars speed by on the highway, their headlights cutting through the gloom. When the bus finally arrived, Maya had helped her grandmother up the steep steps, settling her into a seat near the front. "I'll be right here when you get back," she had promised, zipping up her thin hoodie against the chill. "You be careful, Maya," Eleanor had said, her hand clutching Maya's for a moment. "Don't you go talking to strangers. You just stay right here and wait." Maya had waited. She had watched her grandmother's bus pull away, its red tail lights disappearing into the rain. She had pulled out a dog-eared paperback from her backpack, a story about a girl who discovers a secret garden, and had tried to lose herself in its pages. But the storm was too loud, the wind too insistent. She had found herself watching the cars again, their tires hissing on the wet pavement. And then she had seen it, the black Mercedes moving too fast for the treacherous conditions. She had watched it lose control, a slow-motion nightmare unfolding before her eyes. She had seen it spin, had heard the terrible, final sound of its impact with the concrete pillar. And in that moment, something inside her had shifted. It was as if all the stories she had read, all the lessons her father had taught her, all the quiet, simmering frustration at the unfairness of her life had coalesced into a single, undeniable imperative. You see someone fall, you help them up. Now, standing in the rain, wrapped in a stranger's blanket, the flashing lights of the emergency vehicles reflecting in her wide, shocked eyes, Maya felt a strange sense of dislocation. The world she knew, the world of overdue bills and library books, and the quiet, aching grief for her father, had just collided with a world she had only ever seen on television. A world of unimaginable wealth and fame. She watched as Michael Jordan spoke in low, urgent tones to the paramedics, his hand never leaving his son's arm. He was different in person than he was on the posters. Older, of course, the lines of worry and responsibility etched around his eyes. But he was also more real, more human. The terror she had seen on his face when he had first arrived, the raw, unvarnished fear of a parent for their child, had stripped away the legend and revealed the man. A female police officer, her face kind and concerned, knelt in front of Maya. "Are your parents here, honey?" she asked, her voice gentle. My grandma," Maya stammered. "She's at a doctor's appointment. She's taking the bus back. She'll be here soon." "Okay," the officer said, nodding. "We'll wait with you. You did a very brave thing tonight. A very, very brave thing." Maya just nodded, her gaze drifting back to the scene unfolding near the ambulance. The paramedics were getting ready to transport Marcus. Michael Jordan leaned down, his forehead resting against his son's for a moment. A silent, powerful gesture of love and relief. Then he straightened up and turned, his eyes searching the crowd of onlookers until they found Maya again. He started walking toward her, his long strides eating up the distance between them. The police officer stood up, a silent, protective presence at Maya's side. The crowd of onlookers, who had been kept at a distance by the police, grew quiet, their phones held up to capture the moment. Michael Jordan stopped a few feet in front of her. The rain had plastered his hair to his head, and his expensive suit was ruined, but he seemed oblivious to it all. He was just a father, looking at the girl who had saved his son. "Maya Williams," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate in Maya's chest. He had heard her name. He knew her name. "Yes, sir," she whispered, her hands clutching the scratchy wool of the blanket. He took a deep breath, as if struggling to find the right words. My son, he told me what you did. The rock, the knife. You pulled him out." Maya nodded, unable to speak. "You saved his life," Michael Jordan said, and this time his voice was thick with an emotion so profound it was almost tangible. "The car, it exploded just seconds after you pulled him clear. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't done what you did," he trailed off, his throat working. He looked down at his hands, then back at Maya, and in his eyes, she saw a universe of gratitude, of awe, of a debt so immense it could never be repaid. I just did what anyone would have done," Maya mumbled, repeating a line she had read in one of her books. Michael Jordan's lips curved into a faint, sad smile. "No," he said, his voice soft but firm. "No, you didn't. You did what most people are too afraid to do. You ran toward the danger, not away from it. You were brave when everyone else was just watching." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a wallet, the leather so fine it looked soft as butter. He took out a card, a simple, elegant black card with his name, and a phone number embossed in gold. He held it out to her. "I need to go with my son to the hospital," he said, his voice regaining some of its command. "But I want you to have this. This is my private number. I want you to call me tomorrow. No, I want your grandmother to call me. I need to talk to her." Maya stared at the card, at the famous name, at the promise of a connection to this other world. She didn't reach for it. Her hands, still clutching the blanket, were trembling. The kind police officer gently took the card from his hand. "I'll make sure she gets it, Mr. Jordan," she said. He nodded, his eyes still fixed on Maya. "Thank you," he said again. And the simple words were imbued with a weight, a sincerity, that made them feel like the most important words she had ever heard. "Thank you, Maya." He turned and walked back to the ambulance, climbing in beside his son's stretcher. The doors closed, the sirens wailed, and the ambulance pulled away, its flashing lights disappearing into the rain-swept night. Maya stood there, the world slowly coming back into focus. The rain was starting to let up. The crowd of onlookers was beginning to disperse, their brief, dramatic interlude over. The police officer was speaking into her radio, her voice calm and professional. And then Maya saw it. The bus, her grandmother's bus, pulling up to the stop. The doors hissed open, and Eleanor stepped out, her face a mask of confusion and worry as she took in the scene of flashing lights and police cars. "Maya!" she cried, her voice sharp with alarm as she saw her granddaughter wrapped in a police blanket, her face pale and streaked with dirt. "Child, what in the world happened?" Maya ran to her, burying her face in the familiar, comforting scent of her grandmother's coat. And for the first time since the Mercedes had spun out of control, she let herself feel the full, overwhelming force of what had just happened. She clung to her grandmother, the one solid, unchanging thing in her suddenly tumultuous world, and she began to sob, her small body shaking with the aftershocks of a day that had started with a simple walk to the bus stop and had ended with a legend knowing her name. The rescue itself was a blur of instinct and adrenaline, a series of moments that would later play in Maya's mind like a movie reel, both vivid and surreal. When she saw the boy slumped in the passenger seat, his face pale and bloodied, a primal, protective urge had surged through her, overriding the fear that was screaming at her to run, to hide, to mind her own business, as her grandmother had always taught her. Her first challenge was the door. It was jammed shut, the metal warped by the force of the impact. She pulled at the handle, her small, wiry frame straining against the unyielding steel. Her fingers, numb with cold and slick with rain, slipped again and again. The boy's eyes were fluttering, his consciousness fading. A wave of pure, undiluted panic washed over her. She couldn't fail. Not now. It was then that her eyes, darting around in a desperate search for a solution, landed on the rock. It was a piece of granite, probably dislodged from the nearby embankment, and it was at least half the size of her head. In her normal life, she probably couldn't have even lifted it. But this wasn't her normal life. This was a moment suspended outside of time, a moment where the ordinary rules of strength and possibility no longer seemed to apply. She heaved the rock into her arms, staggering under its weight. Her back screamed in protest, but she ignored it. She positioned herself in front of the passenger window, the glass already a spiderweb of cracks. She took a deep, shuddering breath, a prayer to a God she wasn't sure she believed in, and swung. The sound of the glass shattering was both terrifying and triumphant. It was the sound of a barrier being broken, of a path being cleared. She didn't hesitate. She used the rock to knock out the remaining shards of glass, ignoring the sharp stabs of pain as the jagged edges sliced into the skin of her hands. Blood, warm and sticky, began to well from the cuts, but she barely noticed. Her focus was absolute, narrowed to the single, all-important task of getting the boy out of the car. She reached inside, her arm scraping against the broken window frame. "The seatbelt!" she yelled, her voice raw. "I can't get it undone." It was then that the boy, his consciousness flickering back for a moment, had managed to gasp out the words that would change everything. "Pocket. Knife." Her search for the knife was a frantic, fumbling affair. Her fingers, clumsy and slick with a mixture of rain and her own blood, probed the pockets of his shorts. She felt the cool, hard metal of the multi-tool and pulled it out, her relief so profound it was almost dizzying. But her relief was short-lived. The knife was small, and her hands were shaking so violently that she could barely get a grip on it. She fumbled with the blade, her thumb slipping, a fresh jolt of pain shooting up her arm. "Come on, come on," she whispered to herself, her voice a desperate mantra. Finally, the small blade clicked into place. Cutting through the seatbelt, was like trying to saw through a steel cable with a butter knife. The nylon was thick and unforgiving. The blade kept slipping, and with each slip, a fresh wave of panic threatened to overwhelm her. The smell of gasoline was getting stronger, a cloying, terrifying scent that spoke of imminent danger. She could hear the hiss of the engine, a sound that seemed to be growing louder, more menacing. She put all of her weight into it, her small body contorted in the cramped space between the car and the muddy embankment. She sawed and pulled, her teeth gritted, a low, animalistic growl of effort and determination escaping her lips. And then, with a final, ragged tear, the belt gave way. The boy, freed from his restraint, slumped toward her. He was all dead weight, his body limp and unresponsive. For a terrifying moment, Maya thought she was going to drop him, that he would fall back into the car, that all her efforts would be for nothing. But she braced herself, her feet sinking into the soft mud, and somehow she found the strength to hold on. Getting him out of the car was a clumsy, desperate struggle. She pulled and heaved, her muscles burning, her lungs on fire. She got her arms under his, her face pressed against the rough, wet fabric of his Bulls jersey. She could feel the warmth of his body, the faint, shallow rhythm of his breathing. He was alive. That thought, that single, simple fact, fueled her, gave her the last, final burst of strength she needed. She dragged him clear of the car, her feet slipping and sliding in the mud. She didn't look back. She just kept pulling, moving away from the ticking time bomb of the wrecked Mercedes. She was maybe 10, 15 feet away when the world behind her exploded. The force of the explosion threw them forward, and they landed in a heap on the wet grass. The heat was intense, a wave of scorching air that seemed to suck the breath from her lungs. The sound was a deafening roar, a sound that vibrated deep in her bones. For a long moment, Maya just lay there, her body trembling, her ears ringing. The boy was on top of her, his weight a comforting, solid presence. She could feel his heart beating against her back, a frantic, rapid-fire rhythm that matched her own. She had done it. She had actually done it. She had gotten him out. She rolled him gently off of her, her movements slow and careful. She cradled his head in her lap, her fingers brushing the damp, curly hair from his forehead. His eyes fluttered open, and in their honey-colored depths, she saw a mixture of pain, confusion, and a dawning, incredulous gratitude. It was only then, as the sirens grew closer and the chaos of the outside world began to intrude on their small, private bubble of survival, that the full reality of what she had done began to sink in. She looked at her hands, at the blood and the dirt and the angry red cuts. She looked at the boy, at his pale, handsome face, at the iconic jersey he wore. And she looked at the burning wreck of the car, a funeral pyre of twisted metal and shattered glass. She had saved him. She, Maya Williams, a girl who was good at math and loved to read, a girl who lived in a small forgotten house on the poor side of town, had just saved a life. And not just any life. When the paramedic had said the name Marcus Jordan, it had felt like a dream. But now, as the boy's father, the legend himself, strode toward her, his face a canvas of raw parental terror, the dream became a reality so overwhelming, so far beyond the scope of her small, circumscribed world, that her mind struggled to comprehend it. She had acted on instinct, on a deeply ingrained sense of right and wrong that her father had instilled in her. She hadn't thought about who the boy was, or what his name was, or who his father was. She had just seen someone fall, and she had helped them up. But now, in the aftermath, in the flickering, rain-swept glow of the flashing lights, she was beginning to understand that this single, impulsive act of courage had just irrevocably, terrifyingly, and perhaps wonderfully, changed her life forever. The hospital was a world of sterile white walls, hushed voices, and the antiseptic smell of disinfectant. Michael Jordan sat in a private waiting room, a space reserved for people of his stature, but the luxurious trappings offered no comfort. He stared at a bland, abstract painting on the wall, but he didn't see it. He saw the crumpled wreck of his son's car. He saw the flames, hungry and orange, devouring the metal. He saw the small, shivering girl, her face pale and streaked with dirt, her eyes wide with a courage that humbled him. He had spent his life cultivating an image of invincibility. Michael Jordan, the competitor, the champion, the man who never backed down, who never showed weakness. But in that moment, on the highway, when he had seen his son on that stretcher, that image had shattered. He had been just a father, terrified and helpless, his heart a raw, open wound. A doctor, a woman with kind, tired eyes, entered the room. "Mr. Jordan," she said, her voice soft. "Marcus is stable. He has a concussion, a broken arm, and some deep lacerations, but he's going to be fine. He's a very, very lucky young man." The words washed over him, a wave of relief so profound it left him weak. "Can I see him?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Of course," the doctor said. "He's been asking for you, and for the girl." Michael followed the doctor down a quiet, carpeted hallway to a private room. Marcus was lying in the bed, his arm in a cast, a bandage on his forehead. His eyes, the same honey-colored eyes as his mother's, were open and alert. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice a little weak but clear. Michael sat on the edge of the bed, his large hand enveloping his son's. "Don't you ever do that to me again," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Wasn't my fault," Marcus said, a flash of his usual teenage defensiveness in his tone. "The car, it just went." "I know, son," Michael said, his voice softening. "I know." He looked at his son, at the cuts and bruises, at the cast on his arm, and he felt a fresh wave of terror at how close he had come to losing him. "The paramedic told me. They told me what she did." Marcus's eyes lit up. "She was amazing, Dad. She was so scared I could see it. But she didn't run. She broke the window with a rock. She cut my seatbelt. She pulled me out, right before the car exploded. She saved my life." Michael nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He had built a global empire. He owned a basketball team. His name was a brand, a symbol of excellence and success. But all of his money, all of his power, all of his fame had been useless on that highway. It had been a 12-year-old girl with nothing but a rock and a pocket knife who had saved his son. The thought was both humbling and terrifying. It was a debt he could never repay, a debt that went beyond money, beyond anything he could buy or build. He spent the next hour with Marcus, listening as his son recounted the details of the accident and the rescue, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and reverence for the girl who had saved him. When Marcus finally drifted off to sleep, his pain medication taking effect, Michael went back to the waiting room. He pulled out the card he had tried to give Maya, the one the police officer had taken. He looked at his own name, embossed in gold, and it felt meaningless. What good was a name, a reputation, when your son's life was hanging in the balance? He called his personal assistant, a man who could make anything happen with a few phone calls. "I need you to find someone for me," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Her name is Maya Williams. She's 12 years old. She lives in Wilmington. I need to know everything about her, where she lives, who she lives with, what her situation is, and I need to know by morning. Be discreet. I don't want anyone to know I'm asking." He spent the rest of the night at the hospital, dozing in the uncomfortable chair beside his son's bed. He didn't want to leave, couldn't bear to be more than a few feet away from him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the flames, and then he saw the girl's face, her eyes wide and determined. By morning, his assistant had delivered. The report was a thin file, but its contents painted a stark, poignant picture. Maya Williams lived with her grandmother, Eleanor, in a rundown house in a poor neighborhood. Her father, James, had been killed in a workplace accident 3 years ago. Her grandmother was retired, living on Social Security and a small pension. They were barely scraping by. The report included a photo of their house, a small, sad-looking structure that was a world away from the gated mansions and luxury penthouses that Michael Jordan called home. He looked at the photo, at the peeling paint and the sagging porch, and he felt a knot of something tighten in his chest. This was where she lived, the girl who had run toward the fire. This was the home of the girl who had saved his son. He thought about what he could do. He could write a check, a big one. He could set up a trust fund. He could pay for her college education. He could do all the things that wealthy, grateful people do in these situations. And he would. He would do all of that. But it didn't feel like enough. It felt too easy, too transactional. A check couldn't repay the debt he owed her. A trust fund couldn't capture the magnitude of his gratitude. He wanted to do something more. Something that would change her life, not just her financial circumstances. He wanted to do something that would honor the courage, the selflessness, the sheer, unadulterated goodness he had seen in her eyes. He looked at the report again, his eyes scanning the details of her life. He saw her father's name, James Williams. He saw the date of his death. He saw the name of the company he had worked for at the docks. And then he saw something else, a detail that made him sit up straight. James Williams's hobby, listed in a small, almost throwaway line, was basketball. He had been a huge fan. He had coached a local youth team. His favorite player, the player whose posters he had collected, the player he had told his daughter stories about, was Michael Jordan. The irony was so thick, so profound, it was almost suffocating. The girl who had saved his son was the daughter of a man who had idolized him. A man who had probably dreamed of a better life for his daughter, a life of opportunity and possibility, a life that had been cut short by a tragic accident. And that's when the idea began to form. It was a crazy idea, an audacious idea, an idea that went far beyond a simple check or a trust fund. It was an idea that was personal, that was meaningful, that was, in its own way, as courageous as what Maya had done. He picked up his phone and made another call, this time to his financial advisor. "I want to buy something," he said, his voice filled with a new, quiet determination. "I want to buy a house and a business, and I want to do it in the name of a man named James Williams." He spent the next few hours on the phone, his voice low and urgent, as he set his plan in motion. He spoke to real estate agents, to business brokers, to lawyers. He gave orders, he made decisions, he moved mountains with the quiet, effortless power of his wealth and influence. When he was done, he sat back in the chair, a strange sense of peace settling over him. He knew what he was going to do. It was more than a thank you. It was more than a reward. It was a tribute. It was a way of honoring the father whose legacy of courage and kindness lived on in his daughter. It was a way of giving back to Maya the future that had been stolen from her. He walked back into Marcus's room. His son was awake, watching television. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice stronger now. "Hey, son," Michael said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I've been thinking about the girl, Maya." "Me too," Marcus said. "We have to do something for her, Dad. Something big." Michael smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I know," he said. "And I think I know just what to do." He looked at his son, his heart swelling with a love so fierce it was almost painful. And in that moment, he felt a gratitude so profound, so all-encompassing, that he knew, with absolute certainty, that what he was about to do for Maya Williams was not just a gift to her. It was a gift to himself. It was a way of making sense of a world that had almost been shattered, a way of finding grace in the midst of tragedy, a way of honoring the small, shivering girl who had shown him the true meaning of courage. The days following the accident were a strange, surreal dream for Maya. The story of the heroic 12-year-old who had saved Michael Jordan's son was all over the local news. Reporters camped out on their street, their vans and cameras turning their quiet, forgotten neighborhood into a media circus. Their phone rang off the hook with calls from newspapers, from television stations, from people who just wanted to say thank you. Maya hated it. She stayed inside, the curtains drawn, her books her only refuge. She felt like an imposter. The girl on the news, the brave, heroic girl, didn't feel like her. She was just Maya, a girl who missed her dad and worried about her grandma and found solace in the quiet, orderly world of stories. Eleanor handled the media with a stoic, unyielding dignity. She stood on their sagging front porch, her back straight, her voice firm, and told the reporters that her granddaughter was not giving any interviews, that she was a child, not a celebrity. and that they would appreciate it if they were left alone. A week after the accident, a sleek, black car, the same kind of car that had crashed on the highway, pulled up in front of their house. A woman in a sharp, tailored suit got out. She was not a reporter. She introduced herself as Lydia Powell, an associate of Mr. Michael Jordan. She sat in their small, tidy living room, on the lumpy sofa that had been in their family for 3 generations, and she looked completely out of place and yet, somehow, perfectly at ease. She spoke to Eleanor, her voice calm and professional, but her eyes kept drifting to Maya, who was sitting quietly in the corner, pretending to read. Miss Powell explained that Mr. Jordan had set up a trust fund for Maya. The numbers she mentioned were so large, so astronomical, that they didn't even sound real. She spoke of college tuition, of living expenses, of a future free from financial worry. Eleanor listened, her face impassive, her hands folded in her lap. When Miss Powell was done, Eleanor just nodded. "Mr. Jordan is a very generous man," she said, her voice polite but distant. "We are grateful for his kindness." But Maya could see the flicker of something in her grandmother's eyes. It was pride, yes, but it was also a fierce, protective fear. This world of wealth and power, this world that was suddenly intruding on their small, quiet lives, was a world that Eleanor did not trust. The next day, another car arrived. This time, it was a delivery truck. 2 men in uniforms carried a large, flat box to their door. It was a new television, a huge, state-of-the-art flat screen that was bigger than their dining room table. A note attached to it simply said, "So you can watch the games in style, MJ." The gifts kept coming. A new refrigerator, filled with food from a gourmet grocery store. A new washer and dryer. A team of contractors who arrived, unannounced, to fix their sagging porch and paint their peeling house. With each gift, Eleanor's silence grew deeper, her worry more pronounced. "This is too much, child," she said to Maya one evening, as they sat on their newly repaired porch, watching the sunset. "People like him. They don't just give things away. There's always a price." Maya didn't know what to say. She was just as bewildered as her grandmother. The new things were nice, of course. It was nice to have a refrigerator that didn't make a funny rattling sound, to have a porch that didn't creak with every step, but it was also unsettling. It felt like their life, their small, quiet, dignified life, was being erased, replaced by something shiny and new and foreign. A week later, the black car returned. This time, Miss Powell had a different kind of proposal. Mr. Jordan, she explained, wanted to meet with them. He wanted to thank Maya in person. He had arranged for a car to pick them up the following Saturday and take them to his home. Eleanor's immediate instinct was to say no, but she looked at Maya, at the quiet curiosity in her granddaughter's eyes, and she knew she couldn't. Maya deserved this. She deserved to be thanked. She deserved to meet the man whose son she had saved. The day of the visit was filled with a nervous, electric tension. Maya wore her best dress, a simple, second-hand sundress that Eleanor had carefully washed and ironed. Eleanor wore her Sunday church hat, a formidable piece of headwear that she wore like a suit of armor. The car that arrived was even sleeker, even more luxurious than the ones that had come before. The driver, a man in a crisp black uniform, held the door for them, and they sank into the soft, cream-colored leather of the back seat. They drove through neighborhoods that Maya had only ever seen in magazines, past sprawling mansions with manicured lawns and high, imposing gates. Finally, they turned into a long, winding driveway and stopped in front of a house that was less a house and more a palace. It was a sprawling, modern masterpiece of glass and stone overlooking a pristine golf course. Michael Jordan was waiting for them at the door. He was dressed casually, in slacks and a polo shirt, but he still seemed to radiate an aura of power and intensity. He smiled, a warm, genuine smile that transformed his famous, competitive face. "Eleanor, Maya," he said, his voice a low, welcoming rumble. "Thank you for coming." He shook Eleanor's hand, then turned to Maya. He knelt down, so that he was at her eye level, a gesture of respect that took her by surprise. "I've been waiting to do this properly," he said, his voice soft. "Thank you, Maya. Thank you for saving my son." Maya, who had been so nervous she felt sick to her stomach, found her voice. "You're welcome, Mr. Jordan," she whispered. "Please," he said, his smile widening. "Call me Michael." He led them through the house, which was filled with light and art and ceilings so high they seemed to touch the sky. They came to a large, sun-drenched family room that opened onto a patio overlooking a sparkling blue swimming pool. A boy was sitting on a sofa, his arm in a sling, a video game controller in his hand. It was Marcus. He stood up when he saw them, a shy, grateful smile on his face. "Hi, Maya," he said. "Hi, Marcus," Maya replied, her own shyness starting to melt away. "How's your arm?" "It's okay," he said, wiggling the fingers that peeked out of his cast. "It's boring, though. I can't play basketball for 6 weeks." Michael put a hand on his son's shoulder. "There are worse things," he said, his voice quiet but firm. And in that simple statement, Maya heard the lingering echo of his fear, the memory of how close he had come to a loss far greater than a few weeks of basketball. They spent the next hour making small talk. Michael and Marcus were easy to be with, their fame and wealth fading into the background as they talked about school and sports and video games. Eleanor remained quiet, a watchful, dignified presence, her hands folded in her lap, her church hat still firmly in place. Finally, Michael turned to Eleanor. "I hope you don't mind," he said, "but I've taken the liberty of looking into your situation." Eleanor's back stiffened. "I don't want your charity, Mr. Jordan," she said, her voice polite but edged with steel. "This isn't charity, Eleanor," he said, his voice gentle. "This is gratitude, and it's not for you, it's for James." At the mention of her son's name, Eleanor's composure wavered. A flicker of pain, of a grief that was still raw and real, crossed her face. "I know about your son," Michael continued, his voice soft. "I know he was a fan. I know he had dreams for Maya, dreams that were cut short." He paused, then took a deep breath. "I can't bring him back. I can't undo what happened, but I can honor his memory. I can help his dream for Maya come true." He handed Eleanor a thick, leather-bound portfolio. "I don't want you to answer now," he said. "I just want you to take this home, to look at it, to think about it." The car ride home was silent. Eleanor held the portfolio in her lap, her knuckles white. Maya kept sneaking glances at it, her curiosity a burning, insistent thing. That night, after Maya was supposed to be asleep, she crept out of her room and found her grandmother sitting at the kitchen table, the contents of the portfolio spread out before her. There were legal documents, blueprints, financial statements. It was a world of incomprehensible numbers and legal jargon. But there were also photos. A photo of a beautiful, brand new house with a big, green lawn and a tire swing hanging from an old oak tree. A photo of a small, charming storefront in a nice part of town with a sign that read, "James's Place, Books and Basketball." Maya picked up one of the documents. It was a deed. The house, the new, beautiful house, was in her name. She picked up another. It was the ownership papers for the bookstore. It was in Eleanor's name. And then she saw the letter. It was a handwritten letter, on thick, cream-colored stationery, and it was addressed to her. She picked it up, her hands trembling, and began to read. "Dear Maya," it began, the handwriting bold and confident. "Your father, James, was a man who believed in dreams. He dreamed of a better life for you, a life of opportunity, a life where you could become anything you wanted to be. I know this because I too am a father, and I know the power of a father's dream for his child. I can never repay the debt I owe you. You gave me back my son. You gave me back my world, a trust fund, a new house. These are just things. They are my attempt to say thank you, but they are inadequate. They cannot capture the magnitude of my gratitude. But I can do one thing. I can help your father's dream for you live on. I have bought you a new home, a place where you can be safe, a place where you can grow and thrive. And I have bought your grandmother a business, a bookstore, a place where she can share her love of stories, a place that will provide for you both." a place that will give her the dignity and security she so richly deserves. I have called it James's Place, because I want his memory to be at the heart of it. I want it to be a place that honors the man he was, the dreams he had. This is not charity, Maya. This is a tribute. This is my way of saying thank you, not just to you, but to the father who raised a daughter with so much courage, so much goodness, so much grace. You saved my son's life. In doing so, you reminded me of what truly matters. Not the fame, not the money, not the championships, but family and love. And the simple, profound courage of a young girl who ran toward the fire. With my deepest, most heartfelt gratitude, Michael Jordan. Maya lowered the letter, her vision blurred with tears. She looked at her grandmother, whose own face was wet with a mixture of sorrow and a dawning, incredulous joy. "He's giving us a new life, Grandma," Maya whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Eleanor reached across the table and took her granddaughter's hand. Her grip was strong, her hand no longer trembling. "No, child," she said, her voice filled with a fierce, quiet pride. "He's giving your father's dream a new life." Maya looked at the photos, at the beautiful house, at the charming bookstore. She looked at the letter, at the words that spoke of gratitude and honor and a father's dream. And for the first time since the accident, the tears she shed were not tears of fear or shock or confusion. They were tears of a joy so profound, so overwhelming, so life-altering, that it felt like a new, sun-drenched world was dawning right there in their small, dimly lit kitchen. The world that Michael Jordan had built for them. A world built on a foundation of courage and gratitude. A world where a father's dream, a dream that had almost been extinguished, could now, finally, take flight. The transition to their new life was like stepping out of a black and white photograph into a world of vibrant, breathtaking color. The new house was more than just a house. It was a sanctuary. It had a room for Maya that was filled with bookshelves, a big, sunny kitchen for Eleanor, and a backyard with an old, majestic oak tree that seemed to have been waiting for a tire swing. For the first time in years, Maya had a space that was truly her own, a quiet, peaceful place where she could read and dream and just be. But it was the bookstore, James's Place, that was the true heart of their new world. It was a small, charming shop on a tree-lined street, nestled between a bakery that smelled of cinnamon and a flower shop that filled the air with the scent of roses. Michael's team had designed it with a loving, meticulous attention to detail. One side of the shop was filled with books, from classic novels to the latest bestsellers, a curated collection that reflected Eleanor's deep and abiding love of literature. The other side was a tribute to James. It was a small, intimate space filled with basketball memorabilia, classic jerseys, signed photographs, and, in a place of honor, a framed poster of Michael Jordan, the same one that had hung in James's closet for all those years. Eleanor, who had spent her life cleaning other people's houses, now had a place of her own. She was no longer a housekeeper. She was a proprietor. She moved through the bookstore with a new, quiet confidence, her recommendations sought after by the neighborhood's avid readers. She hosted story time for the local children, her voice, once tight with worry, now warm and animated as she brought the characters to life. She was no longer just surviving, she was thriving. Maya found her own place in this new world. After school, she would do her homework in a cozy armchair in the corner of the bookstore, the smell of old paper and new ink her constant companion. She helped her grandmother shelve books. She worked the cash register. She talked to customers about their favorite authors. She was no longer just the quiet, bookish girl from the poor side of town. She was a part of something, a vibrant, living tribute to the father she had lost. Their relationship with the Jordans evolved into a surprising, easy friendship. Marcus, his arm healed, would often stop by the bookstore after school, and he and Maya would talk for hours about books and basketball and the strange, surreal event that had brought their two disparate worlds together. They were an unlikely pair, the son of a global icon and the girl who had saved him, but they shared a bond that went deeper than their different backgrounds. A bond forged in a moment of terror and courage on a rain-swept highway. Michael, too, became a regular if less frequent visitor. He would slip into the bookstore quietly, without fanfare, and he and Eleanor would sit in the small basketball section, surrounded by the ghosts of his past glory, and they would talk. They talked about their children, about their hopes and fears, about the strange, unpredictable currents of life. In this small, quiet space, he was not the legend, the icon, the brand. He was just Michael, a father who was grateful beyond words, a man who had found a surprising, profound connection with a stoic, dignified woman whose granddaughter had given him back his world. One crisp autumn afternoon, about a year after the accident, Michael came to the bookstore with a small, wrapped gift from Maya. She opened it to find a first edition of her favorite book, The Secret Garden, its pages fragile and yellowed with age. Tucked inside was a handwritten note. "Maya," it read, "you showed me that even in the darkest, most overgrown corners of life, there is always the possibility of new growth, of unexpected beauty. You have your own secret garden now, a life that you and your grandmother have cultivated with love and grace. May it always be a place of peace and possibility for you." That evening, as Maya sat in her room, the rare, precious book in her hands, she thought about the past year. She thought about the girl she had been, the girl who had huddled in the rain at a bus stop, her world small and circumscribed by poverty and grief. And she thought about the girl she was becoming, a girl whose world was now filled with books and friendship, and the promise of a future she had once only been able to read about in stories. She knew, with a wisdom that seemed beyond her 13 years, that what Michael Jordan had given her was not just a house, not just a bookstore, not just a life free from financial worry. He had given her something far more precious. He had given her back her father's dream. He had taken the shattered pieces of a life that had been cut short, and he had built something new and beautiful from them. A living, breathing tribute to a man he had never met. A man whose only connection to him was a shared love of a game and a daughter of extraordinary courage. The story of the poor girl who saved Michael Jordan's son became a local legend, a modern-day fairy tale. But for Maya, it was not a fairy tale. It was her life. It was a life that had been transformed, not by magic, but by a single, impulsive act of courage and a profound, life-altering act of gratitude. Years later, when Maya was a young woman, a graduate of the college her father had dreamed of her attending, she would sometimes drive by the overpass on the highway where her life had changed forever. The concrete was still scarred from the impact, a faint, permanent reminder of the day her world had collided with another. And she would think of the two men who had shaped her life in such profound, unexpected ways. Her father, James, who had taught her to be brave, to be kind, to always help someone who had fallen. And Michael Jordan, the legend, the icon, who had shown her that the greatest acts of generosity are not about money, but about honoring the dreams of others, about finding grace in the midst of tragedy, about recognizing that sometimes the most profound connections are forged in the most unlikely of circumstances. Her life was a testament to them both, a beautiful, improbable garden that had been cultivated from the seeds of courage and gratitude. And in the quiet, peaceful corners of that garden, the echo of a father's dream, a dream that had almost been lost, lived on, vibrant and strong, and filled with the promise of endless possibility.